Hello everybody, and this is Devious Dungeon, a game coming out very soon on Steam, and it is a kind of small form game. One of those games that's meant to be very small, played in kind of short bursts. It seems like the kind where you can sort of, fire it up, play for just a very short period of time, and then go do something else later, and still feel like you've sort of accomplished something that you can only play for, 15, 20 minutes at a time if you want to, and still actually get progress. It's one of those kind of very small form games, and as you can tell, obviously in the background, it is a 2D platformer. It takes that sort of form with some very light RPG elements. How the game works is essentially you're just ascending or descending in this dungeon that has quite a few levels. I believe it's like 68 levels or something like that. It's a lot. And every about 3 levels or so you get a checkpoint in the form of a caravan to help you replenish your goods, and an actual teleportation checkpoint so that if you die you can start back there again. And you will be dying fairly often because, well, you don't always have the power to continue. Sometimes you just need stronger equipment. And you could say that this has like touches of Rogue-lite-ish in it, but not a whole lot really, because I wouldn't really say it has permadeath per se, because of course you don't necessarily start over every time. You simply start from the nearest checkpoint that you got to, or from somewhere else if you want to just like farm some money or whatever. And the main actual system of progression is of course equipment. Now you don't actually find loot in these devious dungeons. You actually just get money, lots of money, and you go back to either the town that you sort of start in or these caravans in between each checkpoint, and you can purchase various pieces of gear. The gear it's pretty simple. The actual RPG elements are very light. You have stats like strength and dexterity and the like, but they only affect very specific, very certain things. It's not like, Dark Souls or anything with a whole bunch of stats that affect many different things to be many different builds. It's more of like a sort of linear progression where each weapon and each armor and the like it's better than the last one. So you're constantly upgrading yourself to constantly get stronger to go farther without dying, hopefully. And every certain number of floors, about 13 or so, there is a boss, and the boss fights are actually pretty cool, I have to say. The combat in the game is very simple. It mostly just consists of you swing a weapon, but some of the enemies in the boss fights actually do demand more attention than that. You can't just hold the attack button down and win. A lot of projectile dodging and the like comes into the game, especially later on when you get to some deeper levels where you'll find a lot of enemies that can fire projectiles at once, so that you'll have a screen that actually needs to be dodged. You can't just hold the attack button and win, like I said, because you have to actually move around. And although you don't have a dodge move, you still, jump and the like and fall through platforms and all that by pressing down and jump as usual in games like this, and you use your movement to dodge attacks, and there will be a lot of attacks coming your way because the dungeons are quite populated. In fact, I think one of the best aspects of this game is actually its enemy variety. And that kind of comes into when a game is simple but still satisfying, that this game actually tends to pull off. When a game that it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of complexity to it, but what is there is actually well-polished feeling, is how I would describe this game. Like the fact that there are actually quite a few enemies, there's a lot of enemy variety, and each one has its own very specific rules. It has its own attack, it has its own ways to dodge that attack successfully, and its own sort of angles and openings to attack it from without getting yourself hit. And you have to just sort of learn the enemy patterns, and although they are simple, they are constant, so that every time you encounter that enemy, you kind of know what to do after the first couple of times that you've seen them, and you just sort of collect this knowledge as you go deeper into the dungeon and fight harder stuff. And it is kind of satisfying to actually go through and learn all the various enemy patterns and things so that you can, maybe get to the next checkpoint with a lot more health and money than last time, because you're not so worn down from having to learn all this stuff, because now that you can actually execute a very clean run through those floors of the dungeon without getting hit a bunch of times and stuff like that. It's that kind of game. It's a game very much based on efficiency, where you're supposed to kind of make it as far as possible while taking the least amount of damage as possible. And each time you go through those levels between checkpoints, you will sort of get better and better at actually doing this, so that by the time you arrive to the next checkpoint, you'll have way more health than last time, and you're way more likely to make it to the next one after that. And you just sort of keep doing this until you can get better gear and can make it through boss fights and the like. And I did mention that the boss fights are pretty fun. I will say that the bosses sometimes have some moves that are a little difficult to dodge because they are very fast. They do telegraph their attacks, so you can actually understand when they're coming and what to do after the first couple of times. But some of these attacks have quite a lot of reach, especially like very fast melee attacks, and they come out real fast. So even though they telegraph them, it can still be difficult to get completely out of the way when you don't have a dodge exactly. But again, it's just all part of the learning process, and you also have what I assume is a very deliberate sort of stutter step to your attack, where if you hold the attack button in a direction, you can actually sort of stutter left or right each time you attack, and that's in games with this sort of mechanic is generally called a stutter step, and that's kind of necessary for you to learn how to use, which I think adds a little bit to the overall simplistic but effective combat. The necessity to learn the sort of attack distances, like how far away you can be from an enemy without getting hit by their attack and still hit them and things like that. It just adds that little bit of extra layer to the combat that makes it a little bit more fun to learn. And as I mentioned, the loot is very much in a linear upgrade sense, so the weapon after the one that you have purchased now will be just better. It won't have like different attributes as much as it will simply have better attributes. And although the weapons are a little bit more varied in this sense, because some of them have different swing speeds, so you may find a weapon that has a much higher attack damage but swings a bit slower, but still it tends to be better because the swing speeds aren't that much different from each other. So generally speaking, the gear that you will buy is a linear upgrade from the last piece of gear that you've bought. And there are 6 different categories of gear for you to go through so that you can sort of reliably upgrade yourself each time, so where maybe, the next piece of armor costs like way more than you have, but you also haven't upgraded your ring in a long time, so you probably have the money to do that instead. So you can kind of choose between more cheaper and more easily available upgrades that will probably upgrade you a little bit less each time, but you can afford more of for now because you haven't upgraded as far down the tree in that sense. Or you can save up for a much larger upgrade like a new weapon or a piece of armor that's going to cost you a lot more, but is going to have a larger difference in stats between the one you have now and the one you're going to buy. So again, it's very simple, but it is effective. It kind of knows what it wants to be. Like I said, it seems to be, because of the way that the game is designed, the way that these checkpoints are fairly evenly spaced out, the way that the boss fights are designed, and these caravans in between and everything, it seems to be a game that's meant to be played in short bursts for a bit of fun here and there, and then you can, go do something else, basically. It's pretty effective at that, and I think that although there's nothing that I would personally say that is absolutely exceptional about this game in terms of this genre, there's nothing that makes it stand out in a really huge way in the other 2D side-scrolling sort of light RPG kind of games that you can find, I will also say that it very much seems to know exactly what it is and what it wants to be, and so that means it is a very polished example of the genre. It knows exactly what it's trying to do, that it sets out, as a sort of design goal, and it does succeed in that. It's not trying to be more than it is. It doesn't have a bunch of design flaws where they tried something and kind of failed at it or anything. There's really nothing that feels like that has been cut short in this game. It feels as if it is designed exactly in the way that it is for a specific reason, and it does exactly what it wants to do with no sort of extra trimmings. And that's okay for a game like this. It is very small, although it is not short. As I mentioned, it does have about 68 levels, so at least it is not light on content in terms of enemy variety, level variety, the tile sets that you go through, which are quite pretty. Actually, I think the art style for the game is pleasing. It looks very nice. It is a pixel art style with a fair bit of personality to the characters and the enemies, and some really nice animation quality for the attacks and things, as well as a really good sort of art style for the overall tile sets and areas. The backgrounds and the platforms and all that have a kind of unique look to them, I think, and they change depending on where you are, so that you're not always going through the exact same design of the same place every time. It does actually alter in between runs, which is nice. So although I do personally tend to prefer sort of more hardcore RPG elements in my games like this, and this offers a much more sort of light RPG kind of experience where the stats aren't necessarily as complicated and there's not as much in terms of loot variety, I think that games like this do definitely have their niche. They have that sort of quick gameplay style that a lot of people are looking for. It's the kind of game that, because it doesn't have extremely complicated RPG elements, it doesn't have like a complex framework that you have to sort of fall into every time you want to play it. It's easy to just enjoy in a more kind of shallow gameplay experience where you're willing to just, pop on for a while, play, feel satisfied at your progression, and then pop off. And there are, of course, there's always room for games like that, and although, like I said, in a personal sense, I tend to prefer more complex RPG elements and things in games like this, that is not everyone, and not all the time, Even though I like very complex games, that's not necessarily what I want to play all the time, and sometimes it's nice to have a more refined but simple experience. And that's exactly what this offers. It's also not expensive at all. This game is going to be released on Friday, August 16th, I believe, for the low price of $5. It's only going to be $5, or your regional equivalent, I assume. I can only say dollars right now because that's the only one I know. But so yeah, it is cheap and cheerful, I would say. It describes this game very well. It is going to be very affordable for a pretty not short, but definitely simple experience. So if this is your thing, if you enjoy side-scrolling RPGs or side-scrollers in general with only very light RPG elements, because you're not really in it for, like, you know, Dead Cells or Salt and Sanctuary kind of experience. That's not what you're in for. You're in for something a little simpler. Then this is very good at that, because it is quite polished feeling, even in its state right now, when it's technically not released and therefore may have like some updates before it finally releases. It still doesn't feel unfinished or buggy or unrefined or anything like that. It definitely knows exactly what it wants to do. So this is Devious Dungeon, coming out on August 16th, I hope I'm getting that date right, for $4.99. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to wishlist this game to be aware of its release on that date, or whenever it does release if I got that wrong, then feel free to do so in the description below this video. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.